And without any further hesitation, I would like to welcome to the stage our first keynote speaker, Dr.LyndaFolan, who is the Managing Director of Inspired Development Solutions. Dr.LyndaFolan is an organizational psychologist, renowned leadership and organizational development expert, and the author of Leader Resilience, the New Frontier of Leadership. As the Managing Director of Inspired Development Solutions, Lynda leads a team that provides leading-edge and bespoke solutions for businesses across the globe, helping them to transform and thrive. Lynda, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. All right, now we'll see if the mic's working. Yes, it is. Welcome to this session and welcome to your conference. It sounds like you've got a great set of speakers and events coming up through the day and tomorrow. I'm going to talk about a key element of mental health and leadership, mainly because this is a massive passion for me. I spent nearly 8 years studying the subject, so I know a lot about it, and so I'll try and articulate as clearly and succinctly as I can how you, as future leaders, can actually learn how to flourish instead of falling over. We've already heard from Michael talking about some of the leaders who we've seen fall over publicly. Hopefully, if you get into leadership roles early on, you actually set yourself up to be successful. So let's talk about how do we flourish and succeed in this complex, volatile world. We are living in times that are just constantly changing. There's a constant need to shift and do things differently. And whether you like it or not, that is not going away. The constant change and flux in our world around is going to constantly pressurize us. The researchers have been telling us for about 15 years that we're living in what they describe as a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And yes, we looked at that and we kind of ignored it until COVID hit. And then everyone put their hands up in horror and said, oh, the world's changing, we better do something differently. And yet the world has been changing. It's been systemically changing over those 15 years. And we haven't caught up with it. As human beings, our capacity to cope has not risen to the level of challenge that we're experiencing in the world around us. Now, Charles Handy, who's one of the experts in organizational leadership, says that actually we need to be evolving both as human beings and as teams and organizations. And if we're not evolving and staying ahead of the curve, we're going to fall behind. We're going to become irrelevant. Charles Handy was clear on this in his book called The Elephant and the Flea. And he talked about societal change coming at us. Now, when I first started in psychology, we used to say you had about 5 years where you could kind of get a bit lazy about changing and evolving, yeah? Nowadays, you've got 6 to 12 months. So the time for change has shortened dramatically. While we've always had change in our world around us, the time spans are much shorter. If you look at how quickly AI is evolving, businesses, organizations, how we do things, it's incredible. So we can't sit around and wait for things to happen. And the risk of that constant change is that you get under an immense amount of pressure. And all of our leaders globally, I spend a lot of time working with leaders across the globe, teaching them how to cope with stress and pressure, yeah? The stress and pressure of the world around them is pressurizing them on a daily basis. I've seen more leaders fall over in the last 5 years than in my whole career. There is a real issue around stress and pressure. Now, you have a choice. You can look at the pressure and go, I'm going to cope with that, or you can tip over into stress. The choice is ours, and I'm going to articulate why I think that and why I know that from a research basis. But before we do that, let me scare you with some statistics. These are the realities if you don't look after yourself. Yeah? Gen Zs particularly, and I see quite a lot in the room, Gen Zs in particular are under huge threat. 42% of Gen Zs have already been diagnosed with a mental health or a neurodivergent classification. So whether we like it or not, we have a pandemic of mental health. The UK is predicting an extra 10 million people seeking mental health in the next 5 years. That's scary. The NHS can't cope now. How are they going to cope with an extra 10 million? We haven't got enough psychologists worldwide to cope with a pandemic of mental health. The statistics are really scary. Michael talked about the statistics in our politicians, but this is in everyday life. This is not going away, and pretending that it's not there is not going to help us. And if we don't learn to manage this stress and pressure, it affects your performance. It affects your performance as a leader. It affects your performance as a student. You know, when you're under pressure and you tip over into stress, your ability to study goes out the window. Trust me, it's a reality. And Jex has researched this repeatedly and shown that your performance drops off dramatically. It's not a gentle decline, it actually drops off dramatically, and you'll find yourself in a really challenging spot. So we need to actually learn how to develop a better way of coping in this VUCA world. We need to stop trying to hope that things will slow down and stop being pressurized and start learning to build capacity to cope with it. I spend a lot of my time trying to convince universities across the world to actually start training students in university around resilience. So I'm delighted to be here at a conference dedicated to mental health in university students, because we just don't teach our people early enough. I've got a beautiful 19-year-old son, and in his whole however many years he spent at school, he did 1 week of education in resilience. 1 week. He spent however many years he was at school learning to spell. We have spell checkers. Why don't we invest in teaching people resilience rather than spelling if we've got spell checkers and Grammarly? Reality is that we have to start to deal with it. It is going to keep coming at us, and we need to start to get a reality check. So, shout out some words that come to mind when I use the term resilience. How would you describe it? Just yell out. You'll have to use your outside voice. Strength, yep. Some other words? Yep. What else? Grit. Absolutely. Grit is often correlated, a lot of the research around grit is correlated with resilience. Yep. What else? Endurance. Yep. Yep. So we know the terminology around resilience, but I want to really get clear on what we're talking about with resilience, because there are some misnomers in our understanding of what resilience is. The toughness that we often hear talked about, I want to talk about that first. So let me take you on a little bit of a journey. I a couple of years ago, was lucky enough to go and climb Kilimanjaro, which is not the highest peak in the world, but it is the peak that you have to climb from sea level to 5,800 feet in less than 4 days. So it's a pretty tough climb, not so much the initial bits, but the last chunk. Now, there was one gentleman on the trip that I was on who was super tough. Yeah, he was an athlete, he did marathons, and he told us right up front that he was going to be the first one on the top. Yeah, none of us would beat him to the top. He was tough and looked like he was going to do really well. For the first 3 or 4 days, he was out ahead every day. The rest of us were a little bit slower. But what he didn't do was he didn't listen to his body. He started to get altitude sickness, and he pushed through. He kept pushing through, not listening to the guides telling him, if you've got altitude sickness, you need to actually go back and rest and then climb again. He ignored all of that. To his detriment, we got to the last point before you climb up on the last night, and he had to be carried down the hill again on a stretcher because his body collapsed because he hadn't listened. So toughness isn't everything that resilience is about. Toughness is one element, but it's got to be balanced. Our ability to bounce back and face challenges has got to be balanced with our looking after our health and well-being in its entirety. And I do mean in its entirety. When we talk about resilience, you've got to look after your mental health. You've got to look after your physical health. You've got to look after your emotional well-being. You've got to look after your thinking processes. So if you're not doing that, that's going to make you fall over. So no matter how tough you are, if you don't look after yourself, you're going to end up without resilience. Now, let's talk about some of the positives. I've talked about the negatives of the mental health, but if you look after your resilience, this is what you'll get. You'll get increased life expectancy. And actually, Dr. Andrew Huberman, who's hit the press this last few weeks, if you follow any of the neuroscientists, he's hit the press because he's been up to mischief, but he's a really top neuroscientist. He talks extensively about if you look after your resilience, you will be able to reduce the effects of aging. So there's a lot of research now that shows that aging can be slowed down if you take care of yourself properly. So the outcomes of resilience are phenomenal. Not only does it help with your well-being, mental and physical well-being, it also helps you to be a better leader. Now, my research was one of the first globally. We only had about, when I published my research in early 2020, there were only 5 research papers linking resilience and leadership. But there's now a plethora being researched, and there's more and more coming out every day. We know there is a direct correlation between your resilience levels and your ability to lead. If you're not resilient, your ability to lead reduces. Your ability to help other people and nurture them and grow them into the next group of leaders is reduced. So there's a lot of reason to look after your resilience. And there are 3 key things that if you take these away and work on them, you will build your resilience. I'm always saying to people that it's no good waiting until you hit a rough patch to build resilience. You've got to be doing it now. Do it now while you've got the time and the energy to do it. Don't wait until you're already under so much pressure that you can't cope, and then it's much harder. And look, I'm seeing a lot of leaders fall over and end up with burnout. You really don't want to be a leader in burnout because that's super painful. That's a really hard spot to be. So let's talk about those 3 areas that we need to build to develop our resilience. The first one is you need to develop what we describe as an internal locus of control. Need to stop being the victim in the world and actually take back control over your own outcomes. Unfortunately, social media is helping us to believe that we're victims. I don't think it's helping us in any shape or form to understand that our resilience is ours and we choose to be resilient or we choose not to. If we sit in victim mode, which actually social media is teaching us to, we sit in a space which is called externally locused, and we want to move away from that to internally locused. And I'm going to describe each of these in a bit more detail. The second aspect of your resilience is your ability to look after yourself and manage your self-concept well-being. There's 2 aspects to that. The first one is you've got to know yourself. Okay? And I don't mean just at a surface level, I'm Linda or I do this, yeah? I mean at a really deep level, you need to understand yourself and do the work that's required to understand yourself. The second aspect is you need to build emotional intelligence. Again, if I look around the room, I see a fair amount of Gen Zs in the room, but I also see the other end, and I will say that emotional intelligence at both ends has dropped in the last few years. So we are not seeing an increase in younger people developing emotional intelligence, and unfortunately, our baby boomers are really bad at this. They don't want to take care of their emotional lives, they just want to be tough. And so we're seeing a lot of baby boomers and Gen Xers falling over at the moment because being tough isn't adequate. We have to build emotional intelligence. The third aspect of your resilience, and the highest correlation with resilience, is your ability to manage this. For years, we used to think that this managed us. Now we know categorically that unless you manage what goes on in your mind, you will not be successful in managing your resilience. Your mental processing has a massive impact on your resilience. If you don't learn to manage this, it's going to manage you, and that's bad news. Really bad news. Now, there's lots of research bubbling out. But the first research papers were only in 2014. We started to see a bit more stuff coming out. Seymour Epstein, one of the earliest researchers here, talks about constructive thinking, the ability to manage your mind to be constructive rather than destructive. Hugely important in resilience. So let's meander through each of the areas and articulate what we mean by them. Locus of control. Locus of control, as I said, you've got an external locus, which is going to make you the victim and reduce your resilience, and you've got an internal locus of control, which is me taking back control over my own outcomes and is going to rise my resilience. Now, if you look at people under pressure, you will see very clearly these in action. If you think back to COVID, the external locus of control, do you remember those video footage of people punching each other for toilet rolls? Remember that? That's externally locused. I've got myself so stressed and turned into such a victim that I think I have to fight someone else for a toilet roll, okay? Now, if you go the other side and you look at an internally locused person, someone who's taught themselves to actually take back control over their outcomes, you look at the 100-year-old gentleman in London who walked around his garden and raised £12 million for the NHS. Who would have thought? A 100-year-old man raising £12 million for the NHS. This is the difference, though. Do you want to be that person who's punching people for toilet rolls, or do you want to raise £12 million for the NHS? The choice is ours. It is about choice. But it takes an effort and it takes discipline to stay on the internally locused. When you see those first world problems, as I call them at home with my 19-year-old, not getting over-egged by them, not allowing them to change the way you think. Now, with each of the aspects of resilience, I'm going to talk about some practical strategies. In my book, there's a lot more detail around strategies and a whole set of chapters that really detail a large chunk of strategies. But I want to highlight a few for each of them so that you know some of the really practical strategies. And we are aligned now between neuroscience, psychology, and the social sciences in what works. So for the first time ever, we're getting the same messaging, doesn't matter where you look. So the first strategy that I want to talk about in terms of locus of control is we need to understand that our reactions and our actions are our choice. You're not being pushed to do anything. You're not being told to do anything. Your reactions and actions are your choice. How you respond to the world around you is your choice. And reality is that's quite a hard message sometimes when we're facing challenging experiences. I remember getting to Australia and I already had a master's degree from the University of London. And I went to the university there and I said, look, I've got a master's degree from the best university for organizational psychology, the University of London. And they went, sorry, we don't recognize it here. You're in Australia now. I could have got really grumpy and cross about that, but I'd chosen to change countries, so I just simply went and validated my degree. I had to do another 2 years of supervision and go under supervision again. But it was a choice, yeah? Yes, I could go, oh, that's terrible, that's awful, that's so bad, and do a drama about it, but that's not going to change the results. I've simply got to make an adjustment. I've chosen to change countries, that's the reality. The second aspect that I'd like to just chat about here in terms of strategies is feedback. Now, most of us hate feedback. We hate giving it. We hate receiving it. And yet, it is the most important thing to help you to get out of an externally locus position. Find someone in your life, a mentor, someone who cares about you, who will tell you when you're becoming a whiny, moany git. Okay? Find someone who will say to you, stop moaning and get over it. Because reality is that actually life is good if you can focus on the positive stuff. I'm a bit greedy. I always have 2 or 3 mentors at any time, and that's certainly helped me in my career and in my journey through life. I think mentors are super important in that space. And your mates often aren't the best people, because you go out for a beer with them or a glass of wine and they go, oh, that sounds terrible. You should definitely give up. That's just keeping you embedded in an externally locus position. That's not going to help you. You need people who care about you enough to tell you when you've got negative and destructive. The third aspect I want to highlight is gratitude activities. Now, I know they've become kind of the thing, but actually they are really powerful. Gratitude is one of the most powerful emotions for shifting negativity. So any form of gratitude activities, just saying at the end of the day, hey, I really had a great day. Now, as I said, I have a 19-year-old. When he was about 10 years old, we instituted Friday evening, so that would be tonight. We instituted Friday evening gratitude. Now, you can imagine, teenage boy, not super happy at this idea. He was really annoyed at me. At the idea. Anyway, we got over the first few times, and actually what it did was on a Friday evening, he told me 10 things that he was grateful for, and I told him 10 things I was grateful for, and it changed the whole dynamic into the weekend. Instead of going into the weekend grumping and moaning, we went into the weekend with a smile on our faces. So I encourage you to think about strategies that you will use. So let's talk about self-concept well-being. I said it's got 2 elements. You've got to know yourself and you've got to have good emotional intelligence. Now, reality is that really knowing yourself is deep work. And I don't play around with this because it is work that you need to do. Stephen Covey is probably the best author in this space. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the most sold book in the world. I think second only to the Bible. So hugely powerful book to read. But you need to understand who you are and what matters to you. When we talk about emotional intelligence in the leadership space particularly is a total game changer. Total game changer. If you want to take up a leadership role, please, please, please learn emotional intelligence. I see too many leaders without it, and you'll probably see plenty of those as you journey through organizations on your journey into leadership. Now, when we talk about emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman's model is the easiest and the simplest to articulate what we're talking about. It starts, first of all, with your self-awareness. You've got to be aware about your emotional reactions to things, okay? It's no good just suppressing it. And I will say that the research says there is a gender bias. And remember that our early research only looked at 2 genders. So be aware that there might be some more complexity in it. But the original gender research says that men are not very good at managing their self-awareness. Okay? They suppress emotions massively. We see it in results in mental health and physical health. Okay? I was surprised to hear from Michael that 50% of the American presidents had mental health, but I shouldn't be surprised because they're suppressing emotions. So when we talk about emotional awareness, you need to become aware of your emotions. Then you need to manage those emotions effectively. If you're not managing them effectively, they're going to damage your ability to function in the world around you. The second side of this is the social awareness. So that's being aware of other people's emotions and being able to work effectively with them. So the social skills around, if you see someone's grumpy, don't go into their office right now because you're going to get your head snapped off, yeah? That ability to work effectively with people is huge when you start to talk about leadership. And at the core of emotional intelligence is empathy. Now, I was with a group of engineers. I do a fair amount of work on mine sites, and I was with a group of engineers not that long ago, probably January of this year. And we were doing introductions around the room. Now, I understand they've been sent to me for 3 days of emotional intelligence training. So they're really not particularly happy about it. This is not their thing. They're engineers. They want widgets. They don't want emotions. So one of the questions I got thrown at the end of day 1 was, can you fake empathy? You really don't want to try faking it because then you're putting on a pretense, the pretense that Michael talked about that actually is going to get you into a lot more trouble. Just learn it. Learn empathy. I was watching the different countries represented here and online as we were waiting, and understanding that different people from different parts of the world have different experiences is part of empathy. Actually, facing those things is super important, and we need to learn that if we're really going to be able to deal with the challenges of our society. Unconscious bias is basically a lack of empathy for other people. So we really need to shift some of these spaces if we're going to make a difference in leadership. But if you want your personal resilience to be high, learn emotional intelligence. And it takes discipline. The outcome of emotional intelligence is dual. You get better at relationships, personal and professional, and you get better resilience. So again, it's worth investing in. I don't believe that emotional intelligence is ever fully learned. I think you're learning it all the time. I learned more about emotional intelligence going through the teenage years with my son than I ever learned in a work setting. And I'm still learning it because he's just about to become a full-blown adult at 20. So reality is, though, you're pushed to learn resilience and you're pushed to learn emotional intelligence. And if you don't learn it, it's going to get in the way. Now, the strategies that I want to highlight here, and I will show you some overlaps that I'm talking about. The first one I want to highlight is journaling. Now, I was on a podcast just yesterday with another organization, and someone asked the question, is journaling just keeping a diary? No, it's not. Okay, so when we're talking about developing emotional intelligence and journaling, journaling is learning how to express your emotions and get effective at reflecting on your emotions. So it's a powerful tool for doing that. It's not about, I went to this pub for dinner and I did this today, yeah? And I went to canapes after this session. That's not what we're talking about. It's actually learning. It's becoming au fait with yourself. Your journal should almost become your personal psychologist. Okay? None of us can afford to go to psychologists every day, so basically your journal becomes your psychologist. I've used it for years. It's the one life-saving thing that I have that keeps me sane in my work. Yeah? I deal with a lot of mental health issues, a lot of stress issues in work and in organizations. I manage large organizations through change processes, and I can say that journaling is a hugely important part of my process for managing myself. The second one that I want to reiterate is the feedback one again, but I want to link it to the ability to reflect. Feedback is only useful if you can reflect on it effectively. So we need to have feedback and we need to reflect on it. And as a society, we're really bad at giving and receiving feedback. And we're really bad at taking time to reflect. It's really important that you take a step back and reflect regularly. If you're not getting better. My view is that life is a journey of learning. My son, when he was probably about 7 or 8. He said, I was doing my PhD at the time, and he looks at me and he goes, "Mom, don't you think you're a bit old to be studying?" And I went, "No, never. You're never too old to be learning, to be studying, to be developing yourself, and particularly in this space. This space of emotional intelligence, you never have achieved it. You're constantly learning new things." The third aspect that I want to highlight is the choice of your attitude. You have a choice every day. You can get up in the morning and go, "I'm going to be in a grump. I'm going to just be grumpy with everyone today." Yeah? Or you can get up in the morning, "I'm going to have a great day, and actually we're going to do some great stuff, and I'm going to actually enjoy things. Even when things go wrong, I'm going to have fun." That is our choice every day. We have to make those choices, and we have to make those even when times are tough and challenging, and we have to make them on a consistent basis. The third aspect of your resilience that you need to build, and as I said, this is the most important aspect, is your ability to manage this. Constructive thinking is the single most important aspect of resilience, and I can't implore you enough that you learn how to rewire your brain. We have now got enough research that defines the neuroplasticity of the brain. Neuroplasticity just means that you can realign your brain whenever you want. So if you want to achieve success and you're not achieving it, realign your brain and you'll achieve your success. So let's talk about what we mean by constructive thinking. As I said, Seymour Epstein is the major researcher here. I wouldn't suggest you read his book. Quite frankly, it took me 3 reads to understand it. He wrote it like a psychologist. But what he says is incredibly powerful, and the lessons we can learn from his research are phenomenal. What he says is that if you could construct in your head your experiences in a constructive way, then you will trigger negative emotions less often and less unnecessarily. If you are constantly triggering your brain into destructive thinking, you will constantly be triggered into negative emotions. So this helps with emotional intelligence, and it helps just to clean up the mess in our brains. Now, for those of you who are Gen Zs, you're lucky. You've got less mess in your brain, okay? The older you are, so the older people in the room, sorry, you've got a lot of mess in your brain that needs cleaning up. So reality is that the sooner you start to clean up your brain, the better. The sooner you learn how to build constructive thinking into your everyday life, the more you are going to be able to manage it. Okay? The researchers tell us you have 60 to 200 thoughts per minute. Okay? So even as you sat here, your brain's going and chatting to you. Okay? Now, if someone was walking down the street without their mobile phone talking to themselves, you'd think they were loopy, wouldn't you? But you're doing that all the time. You're talking to yourself all the time. You're chatting to yourself about various things. Oh, when are the drinks coming in the canapes? And when, your brain's constantly flowing with thoughts and thinking about the next thing. Now, the reality is that even if only a small percentage of those thoughts are negative, you're damaging your resilience. You're poisoning your system. You are creating negativity into your system that is going to damage you, going to damage your resilience, and long-term, going to damage your health and well-being. So if we don't get a hold of this, and 62 to 200 thoughts a minute is a lot, if we don't get control over this, we are not going to be able to thrive in today's world. Our ability to thrive requires that we learn how to manage our brains. Now, I'm going to get a bit techie for a moment, but trust me, I'll make it very practical straight afterwards. I'm going to describe how the brain takes in information and processes it so that you understand how it works, because it's really important to understand this. So everything comes into your brain via your senses. Okay? Doesn't matter whether you believe you've got 6 or 5 or however many, it all comes in through your senses. It hits your thalamus, which is a tiny, tiny little receptor organ right at the front of your brain, interlinked with your eyes. Okay? Your thalamus does absolutely nothing with it. It simply transmits it straight into your cerebral cortex. You know when you see the side view of a brain, it's all that grey matter. Yeah, all that squarely grey matter is your cerebral cortex. In your cerebral cortex is everything that's you. All your experiences to date, all the positive ones, all the negative ones, how you were brought up, the culture you were brought up in, the family morals that you were brought up in, your values, your personality. So everything that's you sits in your cerebral cortex. So before you choose an emotional response to anything that happens to you, you have already filtered your experiences through you. As I say, the older you are, the more of you there is in there, and the more cleaning up you've got to do. Okay? The younger you are, the fresher you are. So start cleaning up now, and you'll keep your brains clean. Once you have passed through your cerebral cortex, you then trigger your amygdala, which is your emotional center. And that's going to create the emotions. So if you filtered something and made it positive, it's going to create a positive amygdala reaction. If you've filtered it and turned it negative, it's going to create a negative reaction in your emotions. So if you think about any experience at any moment in time can shift you from one to the other. Now I'm going to use a very practical example to articulate how this works. So let's imagine we're working in an office and Mary is one of the staff members in the office and she walks in and she doesn't say hello to you. Okay? Now you have a choice. You can choose a constructive version of this, or you can choose a destructive version. I'm going to talk you through the constructive version first. So if Mary walks in and doesn't say hello to you, you could simply go into your head and go, this is in your cerebral cortex, you could simply go, oh, maybe she's a bit preoccupied with something. Maybe she's got something on her mind. Yeah? That's going to trigger a healthy emotional reaction, and I'm going to have some sympathy towards Mary. Yeah? I then go back into my cerebral cortex and just amp that up a little bit, and I go, oh, I wonder if something's happened at home. I wonder if she's got some problems at home that are causing her to not greet me. All I'm doing is just keeping that positive emotion going. So now I'm going to have more sympathy for Mary, and I'm going to maintain a relationship with Mary. So again, this has a double whammy effect. If I stay constructive in my thinking, not only do I maintain my resilience, but I also maintain relationships. Now, if I want to get destructive, all I do is change the first cerebral cortex construction. So the minute I change that to Mary's a snob, or Mary's a bitch, or whatever you say in your mind, whatever language you want to use, whatever I say in my head, the minute I go destructive with my language and my judgment, I've changed my emotional reaction. Now I've triggered a destructive anger emotion, and I'm simply going to just amp that up. So I come back into my cerebral cortex, and I go, oh, she thinks she's better than us. How dare she? She's just so moralistic towards everyone. And I can go on and on for days. I had one just recently in an organization where 2 teams had gone to war. And all of it was over the choice the boss had made about who got the desk that 2 people wanted. 4 years on, there was a war zone. And they wouldn't talk to each other, the 2 teams. So this stuff destroys relationships and destroys organizations if we don't manage it. But if you don't manage it for yourself, it also destroys you. If you are constantly putting poison into your brain, you are damaging your resilience on an ongoing basis. Now, nobody else can see what you're saying in your brain. They can't see when you're being negative or destructive. So this is not something that someone else can help you with. You've got to be honest with yourselves. How much destructive thinking are you using? And how much positive thinking are you using? Always be looking at it. You want to clean up your brains because your brains are incredibly powerful. The scientists say that we only use about 5% of our brains. Isn't that sad? I think it's really sad because we have ultimate capacity. They keep promising me they're going to build a computer that's better than your brain. Never. Your brain is incredibly powerful, but if you're poisoning it with destructive thinking, you're actually damaging your ability to access your brain. Do you know that if you actually start to build constructive thinking, you will increase your academic results? Okay, that's worth bidding for, isn't it? So if you clean up your brains and stop pumping negativity into your brain, you will increase your academic scores. Daniel Goleman also shows that emotional intelligence is directly linked to academic achievement. So they've done research in schools and shown an increase in academic scores related to an increase in emotional intelligence. So this is worth doing, not just because you're studying, but actually because your health matters. Your mental health, your physical health matters. And I can't tell you how important it is to actually learn how to manage these things. Now, I've put journaling again at the top because it's definitely in neuroscience, in psychology, one of the key strategies that we talk about, particularly in this area that we are speaking about, the constructive thinking. Journaling is super powerful. If you're starting to see that negative thinking coming in, you want to question yourself. Why am I worrying about whether Mary's a snob or not? Why do I care? What's going on for me that's making me react to Mary? Who's pulling my chain? Am I allowing Mary's reaction to not saying hello pull my chain and make me grumpy? Why would I do that? Those are the kind of questions we want to be asking ourselves as we look in the mirror and understand that our thinking is dramatically impacting our resilience. The second one, and again, neuroscience, psychologists, researchers across the globe agree on this. Some form of mindfulness or meditation practice is essential for gaining control over your mind. Now remember, you don't have to sit down and do silent meditation. It could be moving meditations like yoga, Tai Chi. Any of the martial arts are a really good process of building mind control. I unknowingly put my son at 3 years old into Taekwondo, probably the best thing I could have done for him. He learned how to control his mind really young. So the earlier we learn strategies to control our mental processing, the better we're going to be, the healthier we're going to be. Also, the third one that I want to highlight is sleep. Okay? If you're not sleeping, your resilience is really screwed. Sorry. You're not going anywhere with your resilience. And it is a problem in our society. Sleep has become a massive issue. Dr. Narina Ramlakhan, who's one of the top speakers and professionals in this space, and spends a lot of her time in the City of London teaching people in large corporations how to sleep. She says that this is the most important thing, yeah? And quite frankly, I can't get away from, if you want resilience, you need to be able to sleep. And I don't mean, that just quick napping. You need good deep rest, because during those deep rest hours is when your brain gets cleaned up. So the neuroscientists have now shown that that's the time where your brain's hoovering. Yeah? Your brain's getting a hoover while you're in your deep rest between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. So sorry, going out drinking until 2 a.m. is not going to help with your sleep. But reality is that we need to get good rest. Meditation and mindfulness can help with that. So if you've had a really bad time, you can supplement it, but it's not good enough in the long term. So those are some key strategies that I would highlight for enhancing your mental processing. So just to wrap up, if you want to build your ability to thrive in this world and take on leadership roles where you're not going to end up stressed and distressed, build your resilience now. Build it early. I remember when I was sat in your seat doing my first degree, thinking, I'll get to leadership soon. I sat in my first board-level leadership role at the age of 29, and wow, was that stressful. And I really hadn't built enough resilience at that point. And I remember waking up, I was with the Hard Rock Cafe, looking after the whole international business, and I remember waking up in a hotel room and going, I have no idea what city I'm in, and I had to get out of bed, pick up the pamphlet from the bedside table, and look at which city I was sitting in. I was so overwhelmed with the volume of work and the amount of travel I was doing that I was this close to burnout. Trust me, you don't want to get there. Learn to build resilience now. It will help you no matter what you choose to do in life. Whatever direction your career goes, whatever avenue you choose to take, if you build your resilience, it will help you to thrive. It will help you to flourish in today's world and find excitement in every day, no matter what you're doing. So I do encourage you to cultivate that. And I am going to open up. Have I got a few minutes for some questions? So I'm going to open up for questions. If you want to link with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. And if we have some questions, got some, looks like.
Yes. So all delegates, in-person and online delegates, can submit questions via Slido, and I'll read some questions here at the microphone. And also in-person delegates, if you'd like to come up to the microphone and ask your question, just meet me here and I will facilitate that as well. So our first question that we have for you is, how long do you journal for each day?
Oh, good question. It depends on what's gone on. So I can sometimes journal for 5 minutes, sometimes for half an hour. Depends very much on the day. If I've watched and seen that I've had negative thoughts or emotional reactions that I'm a bit kind of perplexed by. It might take a bit longer, but really I'm there to try and unpick what's worked, what hasn't worked. I'm doing an evaluation on me. So some days longer, some days shorter. And I've been doing it as a discipline for nearly 20 years. I was lucky enough to go and study with Stephen Covey when he was still alive in Utah. And he implored us at that stage to learn to journal, and I haven't looked back on it. I do, obviously, as a psychologist, also I'm required to have supervision. So I see a psychologist on a regular basis. I don't think we should shy away from that. I'm lucky I'm forced to do that. But I also have good mentors. So I use journaling balanced with mentoring, balanced with proper professional supervision. So it's very dependent on the day and what's happened in the day.
Our next question is from online, from Rebecca, and she asks, as a student, how can I prepare to be a leader if I don't know what I'm preparing for?
Oh, good question. I guess what we're seeing in leadership now is the single most important aspect in terms of leadership is your ability to work with people. So that emotional intelligence, that constructive thinking, if you are building that, that's going to help you in leadership. So my research looks at the link between resilience and leadership. And we use the transformational leadership model, which is one of the most globally accepted leadership models. And really that defines what good leadership is. So if you want to delve into it a bit more, the book, the first few chapters really articulate what good leadership is. But if you want to build your capacity to lead, build your emotional intelligence and build your constructive thinking now. Because it doesn't matter what leadership role you get, it's the people that cause you the problems, not the stuff that you do. I was chatting with a CEO just a couple of days ago before I flew over, and he said to me, "Oh, Linda, my job would be so much easier if I didn't have to deal with people." Yeah, this is a super smart man who's very capable technically, but his biggest challenge is people, not the technical aspects of the job. So the minute you step into a leadership role, it's all about people. So build your capacity if you build your resilience, you're actually building your capacity for leadership. And it doesn't matter what leadership role you take on. I've chosen in my career to take on different leadership roles. So I took on an operational leadership role when I was in retail, and I ran an operation turning over $80 million a year for nearly, I think it was about 18 months, just to test my leadership. And I proved categorically that it doesn't matter whether you have the technical skills to lead, it's whether you've got the people skills. Have you got the people skills? Because that's what's going to make you a good leader, not your technical skills. Yes, I know you're studying your technical skills now and you're going to get grumpy with me, but in reality, once you get into a leadership role, it's whether you can get people to do the work for you, not whether you can get the job done.
Hi, my name's Lily, and I'm from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And one of my questions was, you talked about journaling and the difference between a diary and a journal. And I was just kind of wondering what your best way to be intentional with journaling is, because that's something I personally struggle a lot with. So how do you set the intention to actually get the most out of journaling?
Yeah, my guidance would be have a list of questions. And there's quite a few different resources. So there's journals that specifically have questions. It's good to start off with a journal that actually takes you into yourself. So there's some really good journals that talk about, what are your values? What are the things that really make you tick? So that's a really good starting point to start there. Stephen Covey's book also talks a lot about, really getting clear on what you want in that first process of journaling. once you've got that, then grab a journal that's got questions. So I use a journal that's got lots of questions that just prod me to think about, you know, what happened today that I didn't like? What happened today that I did like? What made me grateful today? So have a series of questions that you can prod yourself with quite easily. But there's some great resources out there now. If you just Google, there's lots of different journals. Don't get a diary. Diaries are not. Grab a proper good journal. There's some really big ones with, and my mother at one stage asked me if she could take my journals and convert them into a book. I went, no way, you're never even going to read them. You do not want to see what goes on in my head. So it really is a pouring out of your own thoughts. What you're trying to do is express yourself in a way that often we don't have the capacity to do in normal everyday life. So get yourself a list of questions or a journal that actually takes you through a series of questions. Once it becomes more comfortable, then you'll do it more naturally. I take myself away for 5 days every year to go and do a reflective practice. Because Bali's only 3 hours from Perth, I normally head for Bali and sit on a beach for 5 days talking to no one, just reflecting. So get a process that you really get yourself embedded in that and are reflective in what you're doing. Yeah. But yeah, there's some brilliant tools out there. Just Google journals.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm from University of Kent. And I wanted to ask about, right at the beginning you mentioned, when you build up your resilience, it prevents burnout. But what would you do if you feel like you've already experienced burnout? How do you kind of come back from that?
Yeah, it's much tougher. Because once you've burned out, you've gone over the edge of the cliff. Often, what I'm suggesting because I see a lot of leaders burn out in my work. Obviously, I do a lot of executive coaching, and I see leaders burnt out before I get to them. What I suggest is they take time off first and really reconnect with themselves, really clean themselves up, clean up their eating, their physical exercise, just get back in touch with themselves as a human being, and then start work on resilience. Because you can't go from burnout to resilience, because that'd be too hard. So I'm suggesting to people actually taking a chunk off, not a week, a month. And in fact, I insisted on a CEO just recently having a full month off, phoned his board of directors and said he is having a month off, he's burned out, he needs to go away. Reality is that we're not good at taking time for ourselves, and we need to be. And leaders do that, oh, we're tough, we're going to toughen it out. That's rubbish. You're going to end up in a worse state. So, yeah, it's really hard to go from burnout across. You know, when I got to those real close edges of burnout in the earlier part of my career, I took myself off for a chunk of time first and then re-engaged.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions, but hopefully you're going to join us at the reception in a few minutes
stick around.
and to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
I would like to thank Dr. Folan once again for such interesting and inspiring insight into mental health, resilience, leadership. I think it was a brilliant start for our conference today. And just a quick reminder about tomorrow. So tomorrow we will open our doors at 9 o'clock and we will start with tea and morning coffee. Sorry, morning tea and coffee. And at 9:20, we will start with our welcome note for the Saturday. So please don't be late. Make your way into Ondaji Theatre at 9:20. And for now, we can all go into our canopy reception for some fun and networking. Well, thanks everyone, and I'll see you around.